When my mother worked in an office for years without recognition, I saw it with my own eyes. This story is not just content for the sake of views, it's a real life experience that many people are familiar with. I want you to recognize yourself in it and not repeat other people's mistakes, especially in moments like the one that happened to the heroine, because to give everything can get silence in return. It's a blow that cannot be ignored.
The applause sounded like it had been cued, polite, restrained, like everyone in the room understood they were witnessing a mistake but weren't bold enough to say it. I didn't move. I kept my eyes fixed on the whiteboard behind Richard as he motioned to Jordan, the intern, to come stand beside him. Jordan looked like he didn't know what to do with his hands. He smiled awkwardly, gave a little wave, then shrugged. 3 weeks in the building. And now, he was apparently the future of Nexora's innovation department. My department, my system, my platform, rewritten from the ground up after Richard had all but bankrupted the company 2 years ago. I had kept the lights on. I had secured the contracts. I had laid every brick beneath that announcement. And now I was watching a child hold a ribbon over it like he'd designed the foundation. Hey, before we go any further, if you've ever been overlooked, erased, or had someone smile while handing your life's work to a clueless replacement, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more than you think, and it tells us you see us. Back to the story. Richard didn't say my name, not once. Not even a perfunctory, thanks to Elena for getting us here. Just, Jordan will bring a new perspective, and fresh eyes are what we need now. Then, with a smirk so faint it might have passed for nothing to anyone else, he tacked on, Elena will assist with the transition. The way one might ask someone to fetch coffee. I heard a chair creak beside me, someone shifting uncomfortably. Maybe they knew this was wrong. Maybe they didn't. But no one said a word. Because Richard wasn't just the CEO, he was family, my father-in-law, the man who used to toast me at holidays and tell his friends I was the future of tech. Apparently, the future had an expiration date. I stood up, slowly, no dramatics, no raised voice. I didn't so much as glance at Jordan, still standing by the whiteboard with his hands shoved in his pockets like he was wondering how long he was supposed to smile. I walked past the projector cart, past the framed photo of Nexora's ribbon cutting from 5 years ago, past Richard, whose eyes flicked up at the last second. I went straight into his office, closed the door behind me, opened the center drawer of the desk I hadn't used in months. I'd been too busy working in labs, in server rooms, on client calls, and pulled out the envelope I'd placed there last week, just in case. Printed, signed, dated. I laid it on the center of his mahogany desk, stepped back, waited for him to open it. Richard's mouth moved first, just barely. "What is this?" "My resignation," I said, effective immediately. He blinked, clearly thrown. "You're kidding." "I'm not." He didn't pick it up, didn't even look at it, just kept staring at me like I was a problem he didn't expect to need solving this morning. I smiled, calm even, no malice, no tears. "Congrats," I said softly, and walked out. The silence in the boardroom when I returned to grab my laptop was thick. Eyes avoided mine. Jordan had sat down. Someone cleared their throat. I didn't stop. Didn't explain, didn't slam doors or drop any mic, but I already knew something Richard didn't. That envelope was more than a resignation. It was a trigger, and he had just pulled it. 3 years ago, Nexora was drowning. Not slowly, this wasn't the kind of graceful downturn that gave you time to realign. It was a nosedive. Licensing revenue had dried up. Our back-end systems were riddled with redundancies, and the development pipeline was frozen in a loop of pointless updates and leadership reshuffles. I remember the day Richard walked into the house, white-knuckled, trying to act like it was a bad quarter, not a death spiral. He poured himself a drink before saying hello. That's when I knew I didn't pitch myself. I didn't ask for a title or a corner office or applause. I walked into the server room and started rewriting the routing logic myself. The old CTO had let it go stale. Whole frameworks were duct-taped together with decade-old shortcuts. I wasn't trying to be heroic. I was trying to prevent Richard's company, our family's legacy, from collapsing under its own weight. At first, I kept my involvement unofficial, just someone helping out while the team scrambled. But unofficial turned into full-time. Then 18-hour days. I stopped taking weekends. I'd wake up at 5, rewrite specs over coffee, field vendor calls in the garage, and fix deployment errors while Richard gave board updates pretending everything was ahead of schedule. No one knew how close we came to shutting the doors. No one knew it was my phone call, my negotiation, that brought Vantrex Labs on as our first real licensing partner, or that it was my rewrite of the onboarding module that shaved 7 seconds off the client-side latency and saved the deal. Richard stood there in the pitch, smiling like a seasoned pro, while I watched from behind the camera feed, reminding myself not to interrupt. When payroll started to slip, I made another move. I created a Delaware holding company, East Ridge Systems, and transferred capital through it to give Nexora breathing room. No fanfare, no conflict of interest. Just a silent capital bridge that saved the quarter. I did it with one condition, that Richard sign off on an equity grant, non-voting Class C shares, with a founding contributor addendum to protect my IP work. He didn't even read it. He just scribbled his name at the bottom and said, "You're a lifesaver." I kept that document scanned, notarized, time-stamped, and filed in 3 different encrypted locations. Because in business, the moment someone praises you for being a lifesaver, they're already planning how to make sure you never ask for credit. The moment Richard saw Nexora trending upward again, he stopped calling at 10 p.m. He stopped asking for my input on platform direction. He stopped mentioning my name in update meetings. But I didn't mind. I wasn't in it for ego. I was in it for the build. I had no desire to be the face of Nexora, but I was its spine. And now, watching him hand it all to a wide-eyed intern with a degree in digital marketing and a half-finished onboarding module under his belt, well, he'd just severed his own backbone. And I had the paperwork to prove it. Richard probably thought I'd cool off and come back around after a week. Maybe he expected a polite email retracting my resignation, something with a soft subject line like, "Just wanted to clarify." That's how he handled problems, by pretending they didn't exist until the pressure died down. But this time, the pressure wasn't going to die down, because that one signature he accepted with a smirk and a shrug did more than remove me from Nexora's payroll. It detonated the foundation he didn't realize I'd quietly built beneath him. Clause 4.2b of the founding contributor. Addendum was only 3 sentences long, but its power came from precision. It was written in plain legal English, no fluff, no ambiguity, and it stated that, in the event of my voluntary resignation from Nexora without reinstatement within 72 hours, all licensing rights associated with my intellectual property contributions would immediately revert for reassessment. Full halt. No downstream usage, no sub-licensing. All active contracts flagged pending review. And here's what Richard didn't understand. Nearly every product line Nexora was currently selling, every module, every UX flow, every back-end protocol licensed to third-party clients, contained my fingerprints. They were interwoven into the very shell of the system. It wasn't just code. It was compliance logic, security architecture, scalability rules. My architecture wasn't flashy, but it was foundational. Which meant that when Clause 42b triggered, so did something else, something Richard never even noticed in the original document, a subsection buried in the footnotes, a licensing auto-freeze across the Western vendor corridor. This wasn't a dramatic shutdown. No lights went off, no alarms rang. But 18 minutes after my resignation entered the system, a silent signal was sent through our compliance servers. Licensing access for our 2 largest vendors, Helixport and Westline Cloud, was placed under manual audit. Transactions involving modules tied to my flagged IP were paused. Upload queues stalled. Server pings timed out. Not enough to raise red flags externally, not yet. But inside Nexora, the data stream had just developed a hairline fracture. Richard's assistant, Kelly, emailed me a few hours later. "Just checking in. I think maybe there was a misunderstanding. Richard mentioned you dropped something off." I didn't reply. By the next morning, Kelly was frantically calling our legal team. One of our integration partners had tried to push a build update through the West Coast server, only to receive a message. Licensing review in progress. Access temporarily disabled pending reassessment. Richard still hadn't read the fine print, but he was starting to sense that something wasn't right. His developers were confused. His clients were stalling. Contracts were being escalated, and he still thought I'd just been upset about an intern. I wasn't upset. I was finished. And the system he handed off like a gift basket, it was already locking him out. By Wednesday morning, the cracks weren't cracks anymore. They were spreading, silently, deliberately, and no one could find the source. Richard's assistant, Kelly, was on her fourth espresso and had a list of internal extensions she was cycling through like clockwork. Legal, compliance, vendor relations, even DevOps, though they hadn't touched the relevant shell in over a month. She kept saying, it's probably a sync issue, but her voice kept rising each time she repeated it. The thing about a legal freeze like Clause 42B is that it doesn't cause an explosion. It's more like a slow freeze creeping across a windshield. Everything still looks intact at first, until you realize you can't see a damn thing. By hour 48, our partners in Portland had hit pause. Their product updates weren't clearing QA, nothing was syncing to the integration dashboard. They'd reached out twice asking if we'd changed protocols. Richard hadn't replied. He was still hoping it would resolve itself. But Nexora's cloud migration to the Santa Clara cluster, scheduled for that morning, never completed. Halfway through the transfer, the system hung, then timed out. The lead engineer flagged it, but no one could authorize a workaround. The approval pathways had been auto-disabled. The freeze wasn't just legal. It was baked into the operational backend. We designed it that way deliberately, during those long nights rewriting Nexora's architecture. I'd insisted on embedding security checkpoints tied to key IP triggers. Richard had rolled his eyes. We'll never need that level of control, he'd said. But I did it anyway, quietly, because I knew better. At 11:06 a.m., a red banner appeared on the admin dashboard in our central control room. Licensing review in progress. Do not modify product shell. It didn't flash. It didn't scream. But every engineer who saw it went still. That banner only triggered during internal audits, or worse. And then the cascade began. Vendor portals started requesting manual overrides. Sandbox environments refused to clone. Client staging servers reverted to last month's builds. The code wasn't broken, but it was locked, like a vault that wouldn't open until the rightful key holder returned. Richard was in meetings all day, swatting away concern with vague answers. It's just a sync issue, he told one partner. We're optimizing our licensing pathways, he told another. But internally, the panic was starting to show. Stephanie, our general counsel, pulled Kelly into her office. Doors closed. Lights dimmed. I wasn't there, but I know Stephanie. She would have already suspected what was happening. Richard still hadn't picked up the resignation envelope from his desk. Still hadn't read the fine print. Still thought I was just taking a break. But Nexora was no longer just adjusting. It was bleeding, quietly, systematically, and with every passing hour, the real power behind the platform, the rules, the logic, the control was pulling away from his grasp. He just didn't know yet how much he'd already lost. My phone buzzed just after 7 p.m. I was in the kitchen, pouring the last of the coffee I hadn't touched all day, when I saw the name flash across the screen. Stephanie Rowland. Nexora's general counsel. Not Kelly, not Richard. Stephanie. She never called without reason. I answered on the second ring, kept my voice even. Hello? Elena, she said. No preamble. I had no idea about this clause. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was something else. Measured. Maybe a little cautious. Like someone who'd opened a door they didn't know had hinges. I'm looking at clause 42B, she continued. Was this part of the original agreement? It was, I said. Filed, signed, and notarized. February 16th, 2020. It should have been in your digital archive. A pause. I could hear her flipping through pages. Richard signed this? He did, with full authority. I could hear the mental math happening in her silence. The document was real, it was binding, and its implications had already taken root inside the company. I'll send it again, I offered, just so you have the clean copy. A minute later, I forwarded the original PDF, time-stamped, with signature pages. Then I sent one more message, short, factual, no threat, no emotion, all rights revert until obligations are met. No further use permitted. That was it. No bold font, no legal jargon for intimidation. Just the truth in plain language. Stephanie didn't respond right away. I imagined her reading it twice, maybe 3 times, the way lawyers do when they're trying to spot a crack in the wall and realizing the wall is load-bearing. When she finally replied, it wasn't a call. It was a single message. Understood. She wouldn't need anything else. Clause 4.2b spoke for itself. It wasn't a demand. It was a pivot point. And Richard, whether he admitted it or not, had just crossed it. I didn't feel vindicated. I wasn't sitting there with a glass of wine, smiling smugly at the kitchen table. I felt exactly how I'd felt the day I drafted that addendum. Steady, prepared, quiet. Because when you've spent 3 years building something no one can see, you don't celebrate pulling the lever. You just watch the system do what it was designed to do. Richard had gambled that I wouldn't enforce it. He'd confused silence for surrender. Stephanie now knew better, and soon the rest of the company would too. They called it an alignment meeting. That's what the invite said. No agenda, no context. Just a calendar block titled Nexora Strategic Alignment. Urgent. Scheduled in the largest glass-walled conference room on the 12th floor, the one Richard always reserved when he wanted to feel like a statesman instead of a CEO under fire. I wasn't invited, of course. I didn't need to be. The room wasn't for me anymore, but I already knew what was going to happen in there. Richard showed up 10 minutes late, which was unusual for him. I'd watched him rehearse for board meetings like they were Broadway openings, but that morning he looked rushed. No cufflinks, tie slightly off-center. Kelly, trailing behind, was red-faced and tight-lipped, carrying a leather folder with visibly dog-eared pages. Jordan was already seated when they arrived. Someone had awkwardly placed a nameplate in front of him, Jordan M. Innovation Lead, as if that would make any of this look credible. He wore a crisp blazer that still had the store crease on the sleeves and looked like he'd barely slept. I don't think he even knew why he was in the room. The board was there, too. Half of them had flown in. The mood was icy, but polite. This wasn't a revolt, yet. Just a group of high-stakes investors trying to make sense of a rapidly tilting ship. Richard opened the meeting by minimizing everything. Elena's exit was completely amicable, he said with a performative smile. We're simply navigating some administrative cleanup due to legacy clauses we hadn't accounted for. Nothing alarming. Temporary misunderstanding. That's when Stephanie spoke up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look for approval. She simply slid a stack of documents across the table, one to each person in the room. Printed, indexed, highlighted. The founding contributor addendum, she said. Dated February 16th, 2020, countersigned by Richard. Chairs shifted. Pages flipped. The sound of fingers thumbing through legalese echoed across glass. Jordan blinked, confused. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop her. As of Clause 42b, all licensing rights connected to Elena's intellectual property reverted upon her resignation, Stephanie continued. What's more? She tapped the stack. Page 3, Clause 6f. A few board members read it silently. One of them mouthed the words as he went. Any unauthorized delegation, reassignment, or repackaging of protected intellectual contributions shall constitute a breach of foundational agreement terms, nullifying all sublicensing rights, freezing derivative access, and transferring control of affected systems back to the contributor until reassessment is completed. Silence. Not tension. Not panic. Just that low-level dread that rolls into a room when people realize a chess game has been played, and they're not the ones holding the board. A board member finally looked up. So, when you assigned Jordan, it was ceremonial, Richard tried. It was logged in our partner update newsletter, another cut in, announced externally. Stephanie didn't smile. That announcement constituted formal reassignment. The clause applies. Jordan looked like he wanted to slide under the table. Richard glanced at Kelly, who avoided his gaze, then back at the board, his face pale. Elena she didn't even hold a formal title. Stephanie folded her hands. Doesn't matter. Her ownership is rooted in contribution, not position. You signed off on that. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was final. His signature, his words, his undoing, and for the first time in years, Richard had no comeback. I didn't walk back in with a list of demands. That's never been my way. I wasn't interested in theatrics or redemption arcs or regaining what had been stripped. My focus was always structural, quiet, firm, and permanent. Richard had humiliated me in public, but I didn't need him to apologize in public. What I needed was a mechanism to make sure he never got to make a decision like that again. So I sent a memo. Not to Richard, not to Kelly. I sent it to the board. The subject line was direct. Proposal for operational reinstatement of IP access. Conditional terms. In it, I acknowledged the disruption caused by the licensing freeze and offered a path to restore functionality. One condition: the appointment of an interim chief technology officer of my choosing, someone with my full confidence, someone who would report directly to the board for the next 2 quarters while a permanent structure was established. No need for me to come back. No need for my name to be on the door. I wasn't seeking validation. I was safeguarding legacy. Stephanie followed up on my behalf in the next meeting. She read the memo aloud. The board reviewed it in silence, then voted. 6 in favor. 1 abstention. Richard. Within the hour, the appointment was confirmed. A former colleague of mine, Maya Simmons, was brought in. Brilliant, calm, and vastly overqualified. She'd once led the system refactor for Vantrex's modular onboarding. The engineers respected her. The partners knew her. She understood the architecture without needing me to hold her hand. Jordan was quietly reassigned. Not demoted. That word never appeared. The new internal memo stated he'd be transitioning into a training support capacity to help facilitate continuity across learning modules. Which was corporate speak for, we have no idea where to put him, but it won't be anywhere near the command line. The look on his face during that meeting, somewhere between relief and confusion, was almost enough to make me feel sorry for him. Almost. Richard didn't say a word during the entire session, not when the vote passed, not when the board thanked Stephanie for her legal foresight, not even when the slide with the new CTO's photo and bio went up on the screen, replacing the placeholder he'd uploaded for Jordan just 4 days earlier. He sat motionless at the head of the table, lips pressed thin, fingers interlocked. I watched the whole thing from my laptop. No glee, no bitterness, just the quiet satisfaction of seeing structure reassert itself. Not revenge, just restoration, a course correction. He wanted to play CEO without reading the blueprints. Now, for the first time in his career, Richard wasn't steering the ship. He was just a passenger. 2 weeks later, I walked through the doors of Nexora HQ without ceremony. No badge, no calendar invite, no reason to be there, at least not officially. Stephanie had left a guest pass at reception. Nothing flashy, just a slim white envelope with my name written in her careful print. No logo, no HR escort. The kind of quiet clearance that doesn't trigger emails or meeting pings, just access. The security guard looked up when I stepped in and hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Whether he recognized me or just read my name on the envelope, I couldn't tell. I didn't stop to ask. I moved through the lobby and into the elevator without speaking to anyone. Floor 9, development. The moment the doors opened, the air felt different. Not tense, not warm, just cautious. People were working, heads down, fingers tapping keyboards, the soft hum of a half-full floor trying to settle into routine. But eyes lifted when I passed. A few didn't look away immediately. One engineer, a back-end guy I used to sync with every Thursday, caught my eye, nodded once. "Welcome back," he whispered. I didn't respond, because I wasn't back. I wasn't there to rejoin the team, reclaim an office, or rattle cages. I was there to confirm that the structure I'd left behind was holding, that the architecture hadn't been stripped for parts the moment I exited, that Richard hadn't quietly reassigned someone to patchwork over what he still didn't understand. Maya had been thorough. I could tell by the layout on the central dashboard, the branching logs on the whiteboard, and the audit checklist someone had left half erased in the corner. She was auditing module by module, verifying every dependency, untangling the mess Richard had created in his push to hand over innovation to someone who didn't know the difference between a patch release and a rollback. In the corner, Jordan sat at a makeshift desk. No monitor, just a laptop and a binder open to a page on platform documentation basics. He didn't look up when I passed. I didn't stop either. My name wasn't anywhere in the room anymore. Not on the walls, not in the org chart. But my work was. Still intact, still running, still holding Nexora together from the inside out. I made one full circuit of the floor. Didn't touch a thing. Then I left the way I came. No announcement. No one followed. But they knew I'd been there, and so did Richard. because later that night, Stephanie forwarded me a single line from his email. She came back. And her reply? No, she made sure you didn't break it. That was enough. I didn't need applause, just confirmation. The foundation was still standing. That's all I ever cared about. A month passed, long enough for the board to stabilize, for Maya to finish her audit, for the internal pulse of Nexora to steady into something resembling forward motion again. From the outside, the company looked intact. No missed product launches, no lawsuits, no press releases about sudden exits. But inside, everyone had felt the shift, the confidence, the new caution. Then, one morning, Richard posted a LinkedIn update. His profile picture, still a decade younger than reality, sat next to a carefully worded statement. Proud to announce a bold restructuring phase at Nexora. Excited for fresh voices to shape the future. Thrilled by the energy and vision of our evolving team as we head into a new chapter of innovation. No mention of what triggered the restructuring. No nod to the systems that kept running while he flailed. Certainly no acknowledgement of the architect he erased before realizing she owned the code, the contracts, the kill switch. But LinkedIn isn't a vacuum. Within an hour, the comments started. Most were polite, congratulatory, performative, diplomatic. Some from mid-level managers, fishing for visibility. Others from distant contacts offering empty encouragement. But then came the one that stopped everything. It was from Aidan Shaw, managing director at Vantrex Labs, one of our earliest, biggest partners. A man whose signature was on the first licensing deal I ever brokered for Nexora. He wrote, "Next time, maybe keep the architect of your entire platform. Just that. No tag, no drama, just a sharp, public reminder from someone with standing." It sat at the top of the comment thread, pinned there by sheer volume of engagement. Reactions flooded in, likes, reposts, knowing emojis, people who knew, people who remembered, people who'd worked with me in the background while Richard smiled for the spotlight. He didn't reply. Couldn't. There was no corporate spin strong enough to erase a comment like that. No rebrand that could make the right people forget what really happened behind those glass walls. The lesson wasn't written in memos or staff-wide apologies. It was written in silence, and in the quiet hum of a company that still ran on a platform he never built, with rules he never read, and protections he never thought I'd use. He thought he was giving my project to a kid. He didn't know I owned the floor beneath his feet.